Hello, I'm Craig DeRoche, CEO of Family Policy Alliance. In our culture in America, it's common to hear about a focus on tolerance. Yes, people want to be respectful and caring of others, but our culture is bought into a lie as it relates to tolerance. And it claims that Christians must be accepting of the views that oppose our faith, in the name of being more inclusive of each other. And this is a situation that I think a lot of our viewers would love some discussion on and maybe some counsel on how to address this, because it's not a national political issue. It's what we experience everywhere we go in our local community. So today, I'm joined by an expert in worldview and religions who speaks, about the, worldwide on issues of our time. Dr. Alex McFarland, co-host of Exploring the World and founder of Truth for a New Generation Ministries, recently addressed these concerns in an article in Townhall called The Tolerance Lie. And you all got to check it out. We'll have the links up here for you to do that. As we talk, you're going to discover a refreshing biblical approach to doing what is right in the world that is going so wrong. Alex serves as the Director of Biblical Worldview at Charis Bible College right there in Colorado Springs near our home office in the Focus on the Family building, where he interviews leading experts on today's social issues. He joins us from his home in North Carolina today. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Craig. It's a great privilege to be on with you. I'm sincerely grateful.
So let's jump right into this. Tell me about the article, the tolerance that our culture, the thesis for this, and the thread that you're pulling on is that the way that people are describing the word tolerance and what it is a lie. We're going to unpack it from there, but let's hit the top note here. The tolerance you're hearing about in Good Morning America or People magazine is maybe not tolerance at all. Isn't that what you were writing about?
Sure. Well, Craig, basically, selective tolerance is intolerance. And for a long time now, more than 2 decades, really, in the newsroom, in the classroom, in corporate America's boardrooms, oftentimes, we're really pummeled with the idea that a couple of ideas that to be a good person, quote unquote, you have to be hyper tolerant, no boundaries, no moral, respectful disagreement. You have to be tolerant. And one of the many contradictions in this, you could call it wokeness, you could call it, hyper tolerance, is that everything is tolerated, even affirmed, except those that have principled disagreement over tolerance. It's like we tolerate everything except those that don't believe we should tolerate everything. So the worldview of hyper-enforced tolerance really doesn't even pass its own standard because it is actually a selective tolerance. The other thing that really concerns me, deeply concerns me, Craig, I mean, for nearly 30 years, I've taught worldview, both in churches, conferences, universities, and for the last decade, I have taught political science. And specifically, I teach on the philosophical foundations of the U.S. Constitution, which this is a whole nother subject perhaps, but natural law. Now, here's my point. We've got a lot of young people that don't understand that America has been America for 248 years because of our moral foundation. And our foundation, our philosophical foundation, and really the secret sauce or the X factor that has made America great and stable and prosperous for, a quarter millennia. It's not enforced relativism. It's not hyper-tolerance. It's not progressive wokeism. It is this trustworthy, dependable, timeless, eternal foundation called natural law. You and I might refer to it as the Judeo-Christian moral foundation. Jefferson, Washington, John Quincy Adams, many of our greatest founders would have called it natural law or a Scottish common sense realism. But apart from your religious considerations, and I'm a minister, I want people to know Christ. Push that aside for a moment. I'm just talking about a stable, sustainable America without moral guardrails and natural law. We're just going to descend further and further into chaos, which is what this hypertolerance has produced, actually.
And that's why I wanted you to be on this show, because not a lot of people are talking about root causes in America right now. And there are thought leaders are talking about the symptoms way far down the line. And we're with Dr. McFarland here, and we're talking about tolerance. And I want to talk about Jesus and what he talked about with tolerance. I'm in recovery for addiction to alcohol. I'll use that as a metaphor. If I tolerated the lies about what addiction is and how to get sober, I would be dead, incarcerated, or insane. Those are the three options where I was in my addiction, and that are available to a lot of other people. And even in that area, we're not tolerating Jesus anymore as an answer. We want it to be considered a medical disease. And we're seeing from all these high-profile people that are self-medicating to get sober from one drug with other drugs, the fiery crash that it leads to. And so tolerance of bad ideas. You say, I'm going to read this to you, instead of let me lift you out of your mess, tolerance says, I support your right to live in your disaster. And folks, isn't that horrible? That's where America is getting to right now, that we're not using what happened with, say, Diddy and the parties that he was having all over the world with these young people and Jeff Epstein and the others. We're saying it'll do no harm if we teach this lifestyle to our kids, because we want to tolerate that lifestyle. No one's going to get that lifestyle wrong. And clearly everybody that pursues that lifestyle gets it wrong. And so my loaded question for you, doctor, and I'm going to say Will Ferrell did this. He walked into a bar in Texas about a month ago, and he bought the round of drinks for the whole bar. You can imagine. Hoot and holler, right? Thank you, Will. You know, he's a Hollywood actor. I love his movies. Guy's hilarious. Then he starts a diatribe about his friend who was a man and, producer for some of his stuff, who's now becoming a woman. And he made it into, that's great too. We all need to get behind people that do this. And the bar went silent. And he mistook it for bigotry and intolerance. This is how far the devil has America gone. But you could have been talking about, I'm from Detroit, the Detroit Lions. You could have been talking about, say, my friend just became a Christian, or something like that. He was baptized today, and everybody knows that's the truth and the light and the way. The bar would have been silent on any of that stuff because they weren't prepared to talk about it, right? But when you're if you accept intolerant people into your culture, aren't you making the whole culture a little bit more intolerant with each one of those paper cuts? Isn't that what you're talking about in your article?
Exactly. Well said. Well said. And whether it be a free beer in a bar, notice that lures very often have hooks in them. There's no free lunch. I mean, there was a catch. Hey, a free round of drinks, but hey, before let's toast this guy who's transitioning, which most people, educated or not, rural, urban, people realize that males don't turn into females, right? Now, let me say this. Just before COVID, Craig, I had the privilege of speaking at a medical school in Kentucky. There were 400 medical students, and there was a panel on what does it mean to be a human being. And, I was there. I've no medical background, although I've been married to a nurse for 35 years. But I was there as a philosopher to talk about what is a human being. And it was just a miracle that I, as a Christian, got on this panel. But the subject turned to transgenderism. And, they were saying, but how dare you not support somebody in their self-identification? And I said, well, look, psychologists and developmental psych, which I do have background in, the regret rates for those that have transitioned is just off the chart. Suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, self-harm. For those with same-sex ideation or gender dysphoria, depression, self-harm is just multiple times more than the rest of the general population. I said, so look, I asked this group of 400 medical students, so if somebody self-identifies, should we affirm them in that? And almost 100% said yes. Okay, look, What about someone with an eating disorder? Craig, 35 years in youth ministry, I've counseled and I had more than a few families get professional help when a teenage girl has anorexia. So let's say you've got a teenage girl or a young adult female that is starving herself nearly to death with body image issues. And I mean, this is more common than you might imagine. And so let's say, by the way, I was at Duke University Hospital in North Carolina. There was a girl, she was about 19. She was under 70 pounds. A few more weeks and she would have died. Now, we're in a hospital room at Duke University with the family, with doctors, a psychologist, and they said, we have to give you a PICC line to give you some nutrition. And the girl says from her hospital bed, but I'm fat. Now, what is the more moral thing to say, oh, that's your self-identification, good for you. 2 more weeks, she would have been dead. No, we said, and I, as not only a counselor, but a pastor, said, look, these people love you, and these people have some wisdom that is going to help you. Now, the good news is, through counseling, through medical intervention, really forcible intervention, her life was saved. And today, she says, thank you. I don't know where my mind was, but you guys saved my life. My point is this: true love, and not only Jesus, but 2,000 years of the greatest Western thinkers, from Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas, C.S. Lewis, Mother Teresa, Billy Graham, they would say that we have a moral obligation to seek the highest good of our neighbor. And when our neighbor, very respectfully but decisively, we say to our neighbor, look, I care for you. I care about your welfare, but let me understand your thought process on this here. This hyper-tolerance, Craig, it's not love, and it's certainly not productive. It's actually, at best, ambivalence, and at worst, malice. And it's not productive, it's destructive. We have to have the courage to call it out.
And that's, I'm so glad the clarity, folks. We try to bring you the best content that we possibly can. And we're Dr. Alex McFarland of Charis Bible College. And we're talking about the tolerance lie in an article that he wrote, that we have the links up for you to check out. And we hope that you do, because, folks, like I said at the top of the show, this is not a random policy that the Congress will never get around to working on. This is actually what you're experiencing. The devil working in every place you go. The local laundromat when you're there, your kid's classroom, the soccer game, friends in the workplace. The lie that we're to tolerate the things that destroy our families and hurt us and lead to our death and our destruction. Thank you for that example, Dr. McFarland. That's what I experienced. And, I say this not flippantly, please. Everybody knows how hard this is for me to say, but I tried to explain what God was doing in my life to people that I love. And I've lost a lot of people that couldn't see that. And that addiction to an alcohol or a drug is not their problem, which is what's taught by medical, professionals in their schools and everything else. If it was a medical disease that I had, how come every time I went back to drinking, I was sober? It's spiritual maladies. We have other people choose sex, anorexia, gambling, divorce, suicide, you name it. That's not a problem. Some people choose violence in the schools. That's not a problem. That's their solution to the problems that we all have. That is what I call it, Doctor, a God-shaped hole inside of us. Yeah. And when we do this hypertolerance thing, what we're doing is actively in this world, this is my opinion, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I have a question for you. What we're doing is we're sweeping the seed off of the soil before it can find the rich soil, or we're scorching it, or we're putting the rocks on it so it can't find its roots. And we're doing that as Christians. And that is not what God wants us to do. We're supposed to be putting those seeds in the rich soil. So please tell your perspective when you talk about this. What people talk about tolerance in our culture right now is far different than what Jesus in the New Testament talks about tolerance. Tell us about some of those points that you made.
Well, thank you for allocating time for this. That There is the moral foundation of a civilized society. More than a few people have acknowledged that, part of the greatness of America was, our Judeo-Christian moral code. And you can't walk one block in Washington without seeing evidence of this. If you go to the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol, there all over you see Moses holding the Ten Commandments. And one of the authors that I love is the late Rodney Stark. He was a twice Pulitzer-nominated historian, and I interviewed him. I didn't get to book him for one of our conferences. I wanted to, but he wrote that it was the stability, the sustainability, the greatness of our nation, and technological achievements. I mean, air conditioning, penicillin, the airplane. I mean, so many things. It was, quote, the iron Protestant work ethic and our moral code. All right, now we're living in a time where even a lot of Christians, and certainly many senior pastors, their highest virtue seems to be niceness. Let's just be nice. Let's be sweet and not ever risk offending anybody. And obviously, we want to build bridges. But here's the thing, and I want to challenge my fellow clergy out there, Craig. One of the occupational hazards of being in God's service is some of the things that we are mandated to preach and proclaim are going to offend some people. When you raise your flag, some are going to salute it, some are going to throw rocks at it. We are duty bound. In fact, Jesus commands it. Our obligation to our neighbor mandates it. We have to tell people the truth. We say, look, I love you. I care about you. I'm for you. But cutting off body parts of children is wicked, and we cannot allow it. Circumventing the rights of parents is morally wrong. Keeping the border open. Do you know, let me just get off on a tangent for a second, Craig. Right now, there are 622,000 illegals in the country that are known terrorists or felons. Of the 12 to 20 million illegals that have been let in, equal to the population of Boston are the number of illegals roaming about. I mean, just a few miles from where I sit, there are Venezuelan gangs that have taken over 2 Denver apartment complexes, and the police are almost impotent to bring it to order. Now, here's the point. Without the courage, whether it be a preacher in a pulpit, an elected official in the halls of legislation, an educator in a classroom, a parent in the home, we have got to have the moral courage and, frankly, the love for future generations to say, look, do we love people? Of course. Do we want the highest good for people? But there are some things that are wrong. There is no ambiguity. Some things are wrong. Some things are right. We must, in this nation, maintain the rule of law. And I just want to say there are a number of voices that inform people's thinking and decision: educators, commentators, parents, neighbors, but pastors. And Craig, a big part of why we teeter on the brink of anarchy have been pulpits, 345,000 pulpits. George Barna and I discuss this every weekend. Somewhere near 80 to 100 million Americans are in churches or synagogues every weekend. And we need ministers that remind people that, look, we will answer to God for how we lived. We will answer to God for having had the courage to speak truth. Our calling is not to go along and get along and, just be these nice, polite, shrinking violets. Our calling, read Matthew 11, verse 12. Jesus said that the church is to proactively fight the darkness. We are to do that. Are some people going to love us? Some people going to hate us? We're not to concern ourselves with that. We are to live our life for an audience of one, and that is the Lord Jesus, who called us to speak truth, whether or not it might be popular.
And thank you for pointing that out. And Folks, if you don't know that we bring smart, very spirit-led people on the show, Dr. Alex McFarland is demonstrating that right now. He joins us. He's on staff at Charis Bible College in Colorado Springs. We're talking to him in North Carolina about the tolerance lie, an article that he wrote that we want you all to check out. And I want you to think through this as we're talking about it as a root cause of what's wrong in America. And Alex, you just pointed out, I was a city councilman. I was a state legislator. I was in leadership. I was a Speaker of the House and minority leader. Something that was 20 years ago. I had a full head of hair back then. And people, other things were working in the world too. People didn't tolerate as much of this chicanery. And a lot of it, the way you describe it, people might mistake for you're making a political statement, because those Venezuelan gangs that took over an apartment complex in Denver have been brought up in governor and city council and even presidential races. But that's the furthest thing from the truth. And that's the devil trying to mask over what is really going on in our culture, is that we've been tolerating and encouraged to tolerate intolerant people and selfish people that are afflicted with an addiction like I was. I'm not talking about other people. I'm talking about, I was in addiction. I know what that feels like. You're a slave. You are not free. And they're trying to perpetuate their worldview. They're not trying to get up on the raft for safety. They're trying to pull you off the raft where you are in Christ. And we could mock these things, Doctor. I'm going to mock them a little bit because you have a higher character than me on these interviews. But imagine if the selfishness of people that come into a country that is not their own, and the first thing they do is disregard the laws of that land. The first thing you should do is say, wow, that's remarkably selfish. It's like jumping the line to the bus, times 100,000.
Yeah.
And we don't have to tolerate that. Then it affects our public safety. Then it affects his other worldview. And then with the sexual stuff that we're talking about too, everybody tries to the devil wants that to be really complicated to people. Imagine if I said, you know what? It's football season. I've been waiting 54 years for the Lions to be this good. I'm going to move in with my fantasy football partner. And my kid will split time my wife and I here, because that's where I want to be. That's love is love. I love the Detroit Lions. We've dumbed ourselves down so silly in America that we can't recognize how remarkably selfish that behavior is. The responsibility of raising a kid with the person that you had the kid with. And after 20 years of this intolerant abuse that we've been receiving from the popular culture, they kind of beat Christians into submission to find their voice. And Dr. Alex McFarland is helping us find that voice. And folks, he travels nationally and globally to talk about this. And as I said, you're there in North Carolina and you got a family farm, and you talk about weeds and the family farm. I just think that's a great story. Could you tell us from your travels, as we're you described a couple weedy situations. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Craig, growing up on a farm is very instructive. And, the old saying, you can take the boy off the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the boy. But, we were in the chicken business for 68 years. We sold eggs, my grandfather, my dad, and myself, and grew a lot of corn, 100 acres of corn. And here's the thing, in the garden is the corn stalk, but also a lot of weeds. And if you want the corn to thrive, you've got to pull a few weeds. And now, the beautiful thing about the biblical worldview, which was the American philosophical political foundation, was that even when people engage in self-destructive behavior and behavior that jeopardizes the community, we try to act redemptively. But, Romans 13, 1-7 talks about boundaries, good civil government that is actually the minister of God. I've known a lot of people I've known a lot of district attorneys and a lot of prosecutors, and inmates that get incarcerated very often will come back to the judge and say, thank you. I didn't like it when I was sent to jail, but it saved my life and saved my soul. So we've got to have some moral courage, because it's not only the souls of people at stake. Ultimately, Craig, it's the future of our nation itself.
The soft bigotry of lowered expectations. You're not as fully human as me. I got sober from God. Maybe you need a pill. That's what our culture is saying to people. Maybe you're not fully human. Oh, your dad was an alcoholic too. Maybe you need some more help. That is, yeah, we love people to death, Doctor. I love this interview, folks, and I could go on for a while, but I want to ask you now about it's just light and dark, right? And in our audience, a lot of people have been saved, and a lot of them have been saved from addictions and afflictions, and they know these stories firsthand in their own lives. So they're champing at the bit, and they're going, you know what? How do I transition myself, no pun intended, to when I'm in that darkness? Whether, like I said, it could be at the local coffee store, or at a local PTA meeting. How do I serve as the light? And could you give us a couple things as we have our time together here to how to help?
Yeah, C.S. Lewis said this. He said, to be silent. He was talking to Christians in Britain, but he said, look, to be silent and to just, be passive would be to throw down our weapons and let the culture fall intellectually and spiritually to the heathen. That was the word he used. And he said, good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy must be answered. The learned life is then for some a duty. And he was talking to lay people. Now, what are we saying? I'm saying that as a citizen and as a Christian, we have an obligation to truth and the God who gave it. And I would just implore people to remember our calling is not to be popular, but to be faithful. And this nation, the founders have said it, many great people have noted it, that the preservation of our nation depends on people that know God and are committed to moral truth to take a stand. And I'll just say this, Craig. For one thing, you're doing a phenomenal job hosting. I'm very honored to be with you. Maybe somebody watches this and you're wondering, how can I know God personally? If I could give my own website, which is alexmcfarland.com, there's a little tab, what does God say about my relationship with him? And I would encourage you to read about that and learn about, we always say this, Jesus is as close by as a prayer. And for those that know him, stay bold, stand strong. But for those that may not yet, remember his arms are open and you can turn to him today.
Well, you read my mind. That was going to be my next question. alexmcfarland.com. alexmcfarland.com. We're going to have the link in here. Folks, we need to be equipped. That's what God wants us to do. When he says steel sharpens steel, it means folks like us that get a whiff of what's going on in the culture, but we don't know how to articulate it. We don't have doctorates in theology, and we're worried about guarding our heart against anger or fear when we wade into those conversations. We need to get equipped. And that's why I encourage you all to go to alexmcfarland.com. I want you to read the article here. That's why we're having this show. And tell them when they get there, what are the first couple things that you would recommend that they consume, sign up for, and from there, we'll wrap up for today, but we'll hope to have you on again really soon.
Oh, well, thanks, Craig. And thanks again. And I certainly appreciate you and Focus on the Family. That's really where I got my start. And not a day goes by that I don't thank God for the privilege 20 years ago of working at Focus on the Family. But, if you would read everything I've written on moral absolutes and natural law. And obviously, as a Christian, the gospel and the word of God is number one in my life. But as a citizen, we must remind this nation about the foundation on which our Constitution rests, which is moral truth, aka natural law.
And it's been a privilege to be with you, sir. And thank you all for listening. We'll be with you next week. God bless.